Now, but it does get us to a very important point on leadership, which is that not everyone provides the same leadership. That the nature of leadership is that it's personal. It arises from particular people, so it will be personal to them what it is that they're interested in, what the challenges that they want to take up. And so you could have what would be thought of as a kind of leadership niche. And the leadership niche means a particular sliver of issues that you want to take up. So it's not that there's such a thing as an all-purpose leader that can solve any problem, but rather leaders are defined by the problems that they've taken up and addressed successfully. So in that sense, leadership is in relationship to a leadership challenge. And that particular challenge means that some people may succeed at it and others wouldn't. So in this sense, there has to be a match between the capacities of the person trying to offer leadership and the particular challenges that they've taken up. Otherwise, they may miss the boat. In other words, they've taken a whack at the issue, but they aren't really that suited to the leadership challenge, so they're not that successful with it. So it's quite possible that people may not have the capacity to solve all problems, but rather are better at some problems more than another. For instance, there are many good leaders that are very good at bringing people together. That's really their kind of forte. And so they're very good at building collective efforts. And that's a form of leadership. Anybody can get people working together on something. It's a really helpful kind of contribution. But there'd be other skill sets. For instance, we need leaders that are very diplomatic. Most of you will find yourself in conflictual situations from time to time in which managing the diplomacy of a situation can be very, very difficult because people annoy us and get us angry at them and things like this, and we say things we shouldn't at the wrong time and so on and get into trouble. Very few people would be unaware of the challenge of being diplomatic, yet there are some people that are very superb diplomats and they're very good at getting through some of that. And then there are people like me that aren't, and never will be probably. Just somehow I can rub people the wrong way with, so I have a great talent for irritation, but that might not always be the kind of leadership you need. At times you want people that don't irritate people, that actually can smooth things over and move things along. So different kinds of leadership may be pertinent at particular moments, depending on where you are in the solving of a problem. The skill set, the qualities, the temperament of people is the right leader for that moment. And so leaders can have their moments and also can not have their moments. In other words, they wouldn't be the best person for particular moments of a leadership challenge. For instance, right now it's very interesting with the elections in France. You have Sarkozy, who's essentially the guy that may lose this election. Why? Well, because he's being judged by his people, by the French people, as not suitable to the troubles of France at the moment. So the misfit may cost him this election. But he got elected in a previous election where the fit was much better, so there was more hope placed in him than there is now. He's polling much more negative numbers. So the fit between leaders and the problem can vary. There can be a time when people think, oh, this person's done really well, and other times people think, oh, well, they're making it worse. Their best days are behind them, things like that. So it's quite possible for the same person to be an effective leader at one point and quite weak in their leadership at another point. Sort of, almost in the sense that maybe some people on some problems, their use-by date has come and gone, and yet they're still out there thinking they're providing leadership, And there would be many examples of this where people haven't kept up with things, and so they're sort of kind of dated now in their approach to a problem. And so their leadership edge has eased, and so they're not providing quite as significant leadership. But these are judgments that have to be made as to the effectiveness of leaders at particular points, but that may be somewhat different from the suitability of leaders generally in terms of their qualities to particular problems or potential leaders. In other words, people are built better for some challenges than others. For instance, there's some forms of leadership where public speaking could be useful. But if you look at the studies done on public speaking, a very substantial number of people are terrified of public speaking. And you'll find many, many people just couldn't provide a form of leadership that would involve public speaking. It would just be too, I don't know, anxiety producing for them and so on. But there would be other people for whom they don't like public speaking either, but can pull it off nonetheless. So there'd be a lot of people that sound quite sensible, but if you knew what they were feeling, they would find public speaking actually quite threatening and quite difficult. And I know there's a man that's just been killed in a bicycle accident, a friend of mine in America, and he was confessed to me different times that he just is terrified by public speaking. And he's obsessive about it. He would have all these rituals he would go through a day, earlier in the day in which he had to speak, you know, almost like magical potions and incantations and God knows what, and as a way to kind of reassure himself so he could get up and do public speaking. But if you ever watched him speak in public, you'd never guess that in the background he's having all this panic and terror about public speaking. Many people can provide leadership or could get better at public speaking. It's not an uncommon thing that people can not lose their fear of it so much as just simply manage their fear better. Because the thing with public speaking that's interesting, I do a fair bit of it, is that the great thing about public speaking is no matter how much you've done before, each new opportunity is a chance to humiliate yourself in public. And public humiliation is a lot more painful than private humiliation. So this is why people are genuinely nervous about it. You really could blow it, even if you didn't the last time you spoke. There's always this new opportunity to really kind of stuff it up, and in a way that's, you know, just completely embarrassing, you know. So you could see why people are nervous about it. Yet, you know, if you're going to get your message across in some leadership roles where you have to get a message across, you're going to have to speak, and you're going to have to speak with small groups, big groups, and whatnot. And some people are just fine in little groups. They can handle that. Their anxieties are fine. A little group like this, it might be fine. But other people would panic if there's 100 people. And I've met people that it's the other way around. If it's 100 people, they're fine. But if it's just a few people, they're just panicked. I don't know why. But that's just the way they are. And then there are people that can speak, you know, to thousands and not be in the least bit nervous about it, you know. So many people that you can't see the back of the room, really, you know. I remember I was just happened to be at a fundraiser for Obama in his election last time. I was in Boston, and so it was a chance to see him up close, you know. So maybe meet him and so on. So, and he just kind of gets off an airplane or whatever, you know, comes in and just kind of, you know, works the room a little bit, and then they all stop, and then he launches into his talk, you know. It was like this guy just was the most natural guy about public speaking you could ever imagine. He was just very accessible and this, that, and the other. But of course, he really isn't. He's just very disciplined, that he can kind of just pull this off no matter which audience you put him in front of. He's just very, you know, he's very disciplined about his public speaking. But he makes it look kind of easy and so on, you know. And it's much easier, actually, I think, doing public speaking than actually doing his job, which would be much more challenging. You actually have to know something. So the type of leadership and the qualities of people are very important in crafting the role. Because the leadership role is how you take it up, the role you put yourself in, and the role you don't put yourself in. So when people create a leadership niche for themselves or a role, then they're finding a place where they feel they can make a contribution and then go ahead and do that. So almost every problem has different roles that can be played relative to it. For instance, a very common role would be advocate. Families are often in the role of advocate. And, but there are different ways to go at advocacy and different advocacy roles. Like, for instance, some families can be very good at supporting other families when they're doing their advocacy. In other words, they're providing leadership by helping others, do what they need to do to advocate for their family member. Others might be better at doing the advocacy for others. In other words, stepping in and doing the advocacy at their request. And there'll be people that are actually quite good at kind of taking a lead on advocacy issues. There may be people that are very good, as I said, in negotiations, that they're very good at the negotiating phase of advocacy. And then there are other people that can be very good in the middle of the conflict, that conflict doesn't make their palms sweat and so on. So being in the middle of conflict isn't really a problem for them. So even in advocacy, there are different roles that one might play depending on where you are in the process of solving an advocacy problem. And there would even be people that are noted for their leadership on a particular advocacy challenge, that they become a voice for a particular change or whatever. For instance, there'd be many advocates I know that they're defined by the cause that they've been supporting. So they're very known as very good at inclusive education, or they're very good at some other thing like employment or whatever. So their advocacy is sort of almost like issue oriented, and they're known for being very good on that issue, but maybe not on another issue. I was just in Ireland last week doing some work and spent a day with at the University of Ireland, Galway, with their Center on Law and Policy, which is a very interesting operation, relatively recent, led by a parent. His name's Gerard Quinn, who's a very capable lawyer himself and advocate, but he's really just very good at thinking through the legal advocacy issues on many, many things. He just has a very good legal mind and a very good sense of how to influence legal and policy issues that on behalf of people with disabilities. So he's even created a center that trains a lot of people on some of the content around particular issues. So you'd have to say, as a leadership niche or role, Gerard's really got a very distinctive role. And his wife, Anne, had spent the week with me as I was doing public speaking in various places. And she doesn't want to do what Gerard's doing. She has a whole other set of interests around advocacy for her daughter in particular, but also trying to figure out where she's still at the phase where she's trying to figure out where she wants to concentrate. So if you like, her leadership role may still be ahead of her once she settles a few of those kind of questions. But she would say, oh, well, I'm in a kind of learning phase at the moment. I'm not sure what I want to do with all this, but I'm just soaking it up, so that's sort of where she was at. So even in one family, you see that there are quite different hats that people are wearing, depending on, again, on their personal predispositions towards leadership, or maybe even in some cases towards not leading. There'd be a lot of people that would prefer not to lead on particular issues, but are very supportive of the issue. So in that sense, you can choose not to lead because that's the role that suits you best. But you may choose to be a supporter of leadership. So another aspect of leadership is this link between leaders and supporters. That leaders get things done because people support them. And if people won't support people providing leadership, then they get nowhere. So leaders are toast without supporters. So there is a relationship between leaders and supporters, or followers, they're often called in the leadership formal social science literature. But whether they're supporters or followers, it doesn't really matter. If people are willing to support the direction they're taking, then it means that they've been persuasive to the followers. So the followers are persuaded this leader is right for this particular challenge. And if you're unpersuaded, then you'll back off supporting a particular leader because they're just simply not, ready for the prime time at the moment or whatever your reservations are. So there's a constant tension or negotiation between leaders and followers, or leaders and supporters. And so in this sense, supporters can derail leaders, and leaders can mobilize supporters. So both have some power over the other. And it's quite possible to be providing leadership but not be able to get support. So it doesn't mean that your leadership's invalid, it just means it's unsupported leadership at that point in history. So it wouldn't be unusual for people that are trying to create change in some way to find resistance from others and not get support. So many leaders are thwarted by a lack of support from others. They may be ahead of their time and their issues may be valid, but nobody's prepared to support them at that time. The thinking of potential supporters is not in sync with the leaders. So you will have leaders that are ahead of their time, and as a result may not be popular in their time because they came early, people hadn't got used to their ideas, things of that sort. And so leaders may be out of sync with the times, and yet in a broad historical sense may be actually doing good things. But at a certain point they may be seen as too provocative or too radical for their contemporaries, things of that sort. And it's quite also possible that leaders may have a valid point to make, but do it so badly that they lose their supporters. So it's not that people would say, oh, I disagree with the direction of the leader, but I really disagree with the way they're going about it. So in this sense, the methods of the leader may be undermining the leader. And so in a sense, people would say, well, some leaders are not ready yet. They're still we're still rookies, really, and they're still a little green for what we want to do.